Italian mobsters kidnap the grandson of an oil baron for ransom, but he refuses to pay a dime in exchange for his return. As time runs out, will he give in and let the Mafia have what they want? Or will his cheap tactics cost a life that bears his name? Hello, and welcome to our channel. All the Money in the World is an American crime and drama film produced by Sony Pictures in 2017, recounting the real events that occurred during the 1970s. We're here to tell you the story of J.P. Getty III's kidnapping, and the film that adapts it. Let's check it out.
1973. The streets of Rome hustle and bustle with all kinds of vehicles and people. Among them is a teenage American tourist, Paul, teased by the prostitutes that the Italian capital is notorious for. Taunting the workers will end up as a mistake for the young man. However, the streets are no such place for him. Indeed, this is immediately proven once he tells them his name, and upon walking away, a van calls out for him. Then masked men exit it and abduct him. His story flashes back to wealth and those who envy it. J.P. Getty, simply referred to as Getty, is an American-born British oil magnate lavishly residing in England who is a tycoon first, art collector second, and philanthropist not. 3 years after the Second World War, he acquired massive amounts of wealth for having struck a deal with the Bedouins of Arabia and building the tanker that could carry the oil he discovered in Arab lands. Through this, he became one of the wealthiest people in the world, but too frugal and miserable to share it. Getty remained luxurious without any intention of spending his immense wealth, not even willing to spend a dime for room service when he invited his impoverished daughter-in-law Gail, her husband and Getty's son John, and her children to his hotel in Rome. The reason why he and Gail and John head over is to have his son appointed as an executive for his company, Getty Oil, even though his son's experience was more focused on the field compared to being administrative. His lacking behavior becomes apparent during his stay in Morocco back in 1971, when his excessive drinking and infidelity were witnessed by his son Paul, the very same Paul that will be kidnapped on the streets of Rome. For this, Gail divorces him, rejecting the alimony she'd received from Getty and her ex-husband John in exchange for receiving full custody and child support for her children. This transaction confused Getty, unable to see how Gail valued her children beyond money. Though having fetched Paul from Morocco, he expressed disgust towards his mother for having taken him away from his leisure with his father. Despite this, Gail does truly love her son, and it will be shown why.
With all that out of the way, the cause of Paul's kidnapping is ever clearer. At Getty's estate in England, he receives a telegram regarding his grandson's kidnapping. While Gail is making all the necessary phone calls concerning the whereabouts of her son, she sees her father-in-law on the news, where letters containing Paul's handwriting have been sent to Getty, who's being extorted for $17 million, to which he responds that Paul is as disposable as Getty's 13 other grandchildren, refusing to negotiate with his ransom.
Furious, Gail heads from Italy to England, while the old miser, after the press release requests for his security advisor. Chase, an ex-CIA covert operative, does business with Arab princes, negotiating with them to take Getty Oil's fairer offer over competitor Standard Oil, while shocking them with his fluent Arabic, impressing the Arab monarchs. A matchmaker of deals at heart, as he's about to strike a deal with the princes, his presence is required by Getty, having him flying from the Middle East to his English mansion. Meanwhile, Gail herself arrived at Getty's estate, welcomed by his attorney Hinge, who relayed to her that his master is unavailable for the time being. While he shares his frugal ways with Chase, Getty further demands from his ex-spy to fetch his grandson in the most efficient yet inexpensive manner as soon as possible, insisting on his cheapskate methods of negotiations. This provokes tensions between him and his daughter-in-law, who is furious against Getty's frugality with his immense fortune. Her son's life is at stake, but her father-in-law can only see the price tag attached to him. All the pressure that's been piling up on Gail from all the media outlets that misrepresent her situation with her son's kidnapping, as typical of the media to do, while her son rots in a remote Calrabian cell, apprehended by a gang under a mafia organization called the 'Ndrangheta. Among them is Calabrian mafioso Cinquanta, ruthless yet reasonable with his hostage. Sharing cigarettes and his family ties with his captive, he tells Paul that family is everything, and that it's his obligation to provide for them. Similar to his name meaning 50, he halves himself on necessity and cruelty. One could say both are one and the same. Alongside his goons, they force Paul to write letters to his mother regarding their demands. Once Cinquanta accidentally shows his face to him, however, things get heated between him and Paul, who threatens with mutilation if he rats out. Even with his threats, however, as long as the captor's hostage refuses to identify them and the ransom paid, their mutual non-aggression trust is ensured, a signifying trait of honor within the Mafia. Paul's kidnapping has become infamous around the globe because in a world full of Getty grandsons, everyone else is a kidnapper. Chase gets his car vandalized by a communist group unassociated with the 'Ndrangheta, but has a lead regarding Paul's whereabouts whereabouts, implying that they could have been the ones that got him first if the Calabrians had not one-upped them. Despite being socialists, devout enemies of Getty's fondness of capitalism, the group demands consolation for the information they provided. Money talks, after all.
Frustrated after months of waiting and with winter coming, the Calabrians grow impatient, with their demands being declined day after day. Back at their hideout, Paul wants to take a leak, with one of the prisoners accompanying him to do his toilet break. Being neglectful of himself while taking a smoke, he reveals his face to Paul, who isn't as lenient as his buddy 50, pulling his gun in a panic and threatening to shoot despite the boy's pleas. A gunshot gets fired indeed, only because an idiot would kill the leverage they need at the negotiating table.
The Italian police caught hold of the news that a burnt carcass found by a river is Paul, prompting Gale to attend the autopsy while berating Chase's performance and his inability to complete his task of finding her son. However, the Italian police commissioner in charge of Paul's case becomes embarrassed once Gale identifies the charred body, not as Paul's but a mafioso member's, soon recognized as an 'Ndrangheta goon. An important lead, a task force accompanying Gale and Chase ambushed the Calabrian hideout with some of the kidnappers killed in action, yet their hostage was nowhere to be found. Soon after, it's discovered that the Calabrians sold Paul under the company of 50 to the 'Ndrangheta Indrina or crime family after being stood out from the ransom, further impeding his rescue much to Gale's annoyance. Chase is left with no choice but to use his arts of the deal with his own employer. The cheap billionaire that he is, Getty can only reply that the ransom is not worth the risk, alongside having his financial security breached by the oil crisis that has affected the product globally. Unrealizing the void within his soul that is his greed, he can only cry for more. Priorities are distinct between the two Gettys, with Gale receiving a call from an exasperated 50 that the ransom has been lowered to $7 million, while Getty himself purchases an artwork depicting a mother with her child for $1.5 million. Meanwhile, Paul plans an escape from his new confinement by setting up a fire by the grasses of the shack he's captive in. Even though 50 sees him running for his life, he chooses to ignore this, having the other Calabrians that were supposed to guard the teenager tend to the fire instead. Letting him go is much easier, considering the entire region is under the Indrina, and he will be found eventually. Paul attempts to call for Gale after he acquires access to the landline, only for the call to be abruptly dropped by the head of the Indrina himself. This complication doesn't excuse punishment, and 50 knew the consequences, so the 'Ndrangheta calls for a doctor to have Paul's right ear removed to be mailed to a top Italian newsletter, furthering their demands, or else the boy will be sent piece by piece.
When the package gets secured as evidence by the Italian police, the news agency demands Gale have her son's ear as a top scoop in exchange for compensation, but she refuses to hear them out. However, instead of the $50,000 she got offered as compensation, she instead requests 1,000 copies of their latest headline be sent directly to the Getty estate to make her father-in-law grasp the gravity of the situation regarding his grandson.
This news also reaches the 'Ndrangheta Indrina, forcing 50 to demand from Gale the already reduced ransom, while stating that further involvement with the police is a disruption of his code of honor to the Indrina. The mobsters aren't the only ones desperate either. Despite Gale's taunted action towards her father-in-law, she's too desperate to amass any amount she can for the payment she needs. She recalls that during their stay at Getty Hotel way back, the old man handed a younger Paul a miniature trinket he teased she could auction for $1.2 million. Added to that tease has been the fact that the miniature is nothing more than a tourist trinket he bought for $10, and she makes a fool out of herself upon bringing it to a couple of museums for inspection. They can only confirm to her that Getty is but a cheap old man. Desperate to have her son enact, Gale flies to London to ask from Getty the ransom he'd been reluctant to pay after months upon months of stalling. But the despair turns into indignation when the billionaire tells her that for her to acquire the ransom payment, she must hand over her custody of Paul and the rest of her kids to her ex-husband John, only to receive the requested amount via loaning it to Paul with interest to write it off as a tax deductible, further hampering Paul's ransom by the bureaucracy of taxation. Even when his grandson's life is in danger, saving it requires the least amount of expense for someone who has all the money in the world. To make matters worse, though lowered to $4 million after further negotiations, Gale's attorney researched that the only non-tax deductible amount is $1 million as per U.S. tax codes, 3/4 shy of the amount the 'Ndrangheta demands for the return of her son. To acquire the amount needed to pay the ransom in full, she devises plans with Chase, using his deal-making skills, and attends a press conference, stating that she has the full amount to pay, the news reaching Getty. Falling for their trap, the intended effect on her press release reaching the old man is all they're looking for.
Afterwards, as Chase is hastily recalled to his estate, the security advisor threatens his resignation. The billionaire starts seeing the true value of his family beyond just financial means. Eventually, after all this time, Getty finally agrees to pay the money for his grandchild, while also vetoing the initial parental agreement he forced Gail to sign with her ex-husband.
With all the cash in hand, Chase and Gail head off for a desolate location in Italy as instructed by the Indrina. During this, while being told to stay inside the designated culvert where he's to be retrieved, Cinquanta, with an act of compassion, tells Paul to run off for the town of Loria nearby, saying that he should never step foot in Italy again for his safety. Gail and Chase drop off the money where they're told to, then are instructed further to head for a gas station payphone once the Indrina receives the money in full. Getting their share of the prize, they tell the agent and the boy's mother to find Paul in the culvert, only for him not to be there. As soon as Chase realizes he ran, they make headway for the town. Furious, the Indran get a task themselves to find the boy and kill him to cut off loose ends once they discover that Chase and Gail had the Italian police track them down, while also sensing that a rat is among them. At night in Loria, Paul tries to convince anyone willing to take him in for safety, but the populace is unwilling to be involved with this mafia nonsense. While running and hiding, he stumbles upon Chase and in confusion runs away thinking he's one of them. Then an actual Indrangheta mobster tries to capture him, only to be knocked out by Cinquanta, who secretly followed Paul to secure his safety. Handing him over to his mother and the ex-secret agent, Paul tightly hugs Gail after having the greatest struggle he's had in his life for just bearing the name of his grandfather. During all of this, back at his estate, the old and frail billionaire, haunted by the nightmarish prospect of his grandson not making it, grabbed the painting he bought prior, triggering the alarm system of his art gallery. Gasping in a cold sweat, he begged for his grandchild, breathing his last breath as he holds on to dear life the artwork that bears a mother and her child. If he ever found what he valued most in the world, it had been at that very last moment. Better late than never. Gail is handed to manage all of the late Getty's estate and art inheritances until her children inherit them once they become of age. Getty's attorney describes what he left in his will, stating that Getty Oil has been set up as a charitable trust despite not having given 1 penny to charity. All the income he's made is tax-free but can't be spent anywhere, his assets practically frozen. Before Paul becomes of age, all inheritances are under his administration. While telling Chase to go spend some time with her son, she takes a look at the idols bearing the faces of the emperors of Rome she's to have her children inherit, among the sculptures resembling the old man. Staring at it, she can't help but be appalled at how much pride the billionaire had. For this, she returns what he took, to the extent of donating much of his fortune to humanitarian aid while still keeping his art gallery as a sight to behold for those who wish to have immense wealth as Getty had.
As an autobiographical adaptation, the storytelling stays essential to its source material. Based on real events, it tells the tale of one man who just couldn't give up his pride and his money. To be as greedy yet miserly as Getty is a cautionary tale for those responsible with immense wealth. The fact of the matter is, once people acquire wealth, many will envy them, forcing themselves to hide within their own economic bubble, frightened by those who threaten to pop it. It serves as a real-world example of how people are willing to risk as little as possible just to have more. And we all know how true that is. Warn yourselves not to be consumed by your own greed, because there are more things that matter in this world besides money. To know what you truly value in this world, watch this film with your family and friends. They'll surely love it, and so will you. Please subscribe to our channel to be notified every time we upload, and don't forget to suggest movies that you want us to recap in the comments down below.